Let's break the political talk show mold. Anything worth doing is hard, and that includes being a good citizen. Our mission is to help you be that better citizen by letting you hear about stuff you might not know, which will make everyone think you're so smart, or by giving you a chance to listen to interviews and debates on a wide variety of subjects that might actually allow you to form new opinions in the privacy of your own mind. I'm Justin Oldham, and you are listening to the Politics and Patriotism Show here on the Stitcher Smart Radio Network. Good morning, good evening, whenever you are, and welcome to another special YouTube edition of the Politics and Patriotism Show. We're digging deep into the archives, going back all the way to August of 2012, when this plucky little podcast was a relatively unknown quantity, and we were talking to Ann K. Nagel about the landing of Curiosity on Mars. That's the nuclear-powered exploration machine that is still roaming around on Mars today. This was big news at the time, and Ann was available as a space enthusiast to make some commentary on this, so we had her on the show. Now, what we could not tell you at the time was that she was working on a book. This is A Journey to Azelfafage. You can find it online through your favorite bookseller, and it is actually connected to space-related themes. That's about all I want to say to it by the way of tease. I'm just kidding. It's actually her lifetime accumulation of poetry, and much of it has space themes. And we were talking off-air between commercials about what she was doing with the book and what she was thinking about doing with the book, but we couldn't reveal anything to you then. But now it's out there for the world to see, so we can talk about it. And at the time, I was joking. I was threatening that, hey, we're going to have to bring this episode back after the book publishes. And so now I'm here to make good on that promise. Now, as you're about to hear, this is a very political conversation with some very civic themes in its own right. So I don't want you to think that there's no place for this conversation on this type of program. So please get comfortable, turn on your favorite internet surfing device so that you can Google some of the technology and slang terms that pop up during the course of this episode, and let's remember what it was like for Curiosity to land on Mars, because hey, that was just out of this world.
Greatest contact. A single bogey and it's nearly on top of us.
Identify.
No transponders, no recognition codes.
As I speak, it is Monday, August 6th of 2012. In the early hours of this AM, the nuclear-powered exploration vehicle Curiosity landed on Mars. Ann, how are you?
I am not bad.
You know, we have seen in our lifetime everything from the Mercury and Gemini to the Apollo missions, the first landing on the moon, the various space shuttles, the International Space Station, the Hubble Space Telescope, and everything in between. And now this. They have successfully put a lander on Mars that's about the size of your car, and it's powered by a nuclear battery about the size of, about the size of a basket of laundry, from what I understand, and it could keep that vehicle running for decades.
Yes, and there are those who say, let's not put nuclear stuff on Mars.
Well, it's too late now, because the cost of going to get that would exceed anything that there might be left over in the old Reagan-era Superfund cleanup tab. So now, with this new vehicle on Mars, we now have new capabilities that none of the previous exploration vehicles like Spirit had before, because now this thing has gas chromatographs, and it has microscopes, and it's even got a laser. So, I mean, how cool is that?
That's pretty cool.
Now, because this conversation will live forever once it's uploaded to the internet, let's think about what future generations are going to regard this as when they find it, because it is basically going to be a time capsule. For them, the fate of Curiosity will be known. I mean, that vehicle is probably going to outlive both of us. So someday, people of the 22nd century will know when, where, and how exactly it finally conked out.
That's true. But It'll take a while for it to totally die, won't it?
It will, and speaking of things that die, it still just bugs the hell out of me that we're sending unmanned vehicles when we have the technology to actually send people. And here we are in 2012. This is an election year. President Obama wants a second term, and I'm not really sure that he deserves a second term, because not only is he the guy who killed the shuttle program de facto once and for all, but he's also the guy who has redirected NASA for at least the next decade to continue on with these unmanned missions because they're cheaper.
Oh, that's true. Budget. It comes down to budget.
Now, when I think back to the first moon landing with Neil Armstrong and all that, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, I remember the Cold War just as well as you do. And yes, there was an us versus them mentality. There was a real, genuine space race. And I think that one of the things that hangs us up right now is the fact that there is no space race when there should be a space race. And I will even go so far as to say there is no official space race when there should be an official space race, because in recent months, just within the last 6 months, we've seen a tremendous amount of space activity out of the Chinese, and yet American officials here in the United States at NASA, State Department, even in the White House, are treating it like it's no big.
I'm going to ask you this straight out. How much of that is just trying to save face?
Well, if they're trying to save face, they're doing a lousy job, because we are supposed to be the world's preeminent power, and you would think that would also make us the preeminent leader, and I fail to see how we lead by being so inactive and so silent.
Exactly. I think you touched upon a very important point there. We need to regain the momentum. And here's another question that I want you to touch on. What happened that we fell flat on our faces?
Well, I think the short answer is that the Soviet Union crashed and burned, and as soon as they stepped off the world stage, then there was nobody to compete with, and there was an entire decade in which China was not yet a factor, and we lost our way. That really is what it boils down to. And yeah, okay, sure, the International Space Station is cool, but I think it gives us a false sense of security. And it's worth noting that the Chinese have got themselves an experimental space station in orbit right now, just a little tiny thing, but it gives them something to practice with, so that when they want to build a larger space station in the future, it's going to take a lot of people by surprise when it should not have.
That is very true. I think that you kind of touched upon it. The old Soviet Union stepped off the stage, and it's like, so did we.
Well, as the world's preeminent power, we couldn't really step off the stage because we occupied it front and center. But there has been, since 1990, a real power vacuum in that respect. But that power vacuum is in the process of being filled. As you look at the way the world economies stack up right now, America is at the top, China is number 2, and then the combined economies of Europe are a very distant third. So that tells you how hard it is to be a superpower in today's world. Now, eventually, I think that operations like this Curiosity mission will have a number of important paydays, because, I mean, let's face it, there's a hell of a lot of patents that come with an operation like this, and the spin-offs from these space technologies will benefit every consuming human being here on planet Earth. But until there is a new sense of urgency, we won't see the kind of activity that we saw from the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo programs. I mean, even going back to the days of Space Lab. You know, Space Lab was our version of a small training vehicle. It was only meant to be temporary. It was never intended to be long-term. They just kind of built it from whatever they had laying around, and they threw it up there, and they kind of drove it around to see what it was like. And there was a long-term plan to come back later on and build something bigger like the International Space Station, but the collapse of the Soviet Union put an end to that, and because the Russian space station Mir. I mean, you remember the Mir space station. It was such a popular thing that it showed up in books and movies everywhere. And I think that in general, the people of planet Earth, they got bored with it. It's like, yay, we got space stations, good for us, yawn, what's next? And because because we got bored with it, and because there was this post-Soviet power vacuum, it was real easy for politicians to step away from it, divert funding away from it, and move on to other things. My biggest concern now is that we have put ourselves on this track where unmanned platforms will be the way of the future until somebody takes us by surprise. And the reason this is important to me is that, as you know, based on my science fiction writings, I think it matters who is the gatekeeper of space. Because
Exactly.
as long as we are the gatekeepers of space, everybody gets their shot at this. The Russians have sent their own exploration vehicle to Mars, and it's up there right now doing whatever it's doing, and it's possible for the Russians to do this because we're holding the door open for them to do it, and eventually the Europeans are going to do it, the Japanese are going to do it, there's even talk of the South Koreans doing it. To put a fine point on this, we do not have any reassurances from the Chinese that they will allow same or similar access for anybody else once they are the dominant power in space.
And you hit on something very important. I recall when I was much, much younger, in the Gemini missions, one of the spacewalks, I think it was the first spacewalk, he didn't want to come back in. That is something that is human, and it's something that a human being can relate to. If we had put some sort of Antarctic rover out there instead of Admiral Byrd, it would have been, yeah, okay, it's cold. So what, but now that somebody walked there, then it's, yeah, we've been there, and we need to do that with Mars. We need to go back to the moon, and we need to do that to Mars, because that's the only way we can actually relate to it, through the eyes of a human being, so that we can say, yes, a human being has actually done it, has actually been there.
Sure, I recall being just 5 years old at the time, seeing the pictures of the first moon landing as they were live on television. And this stuff was black and white, and it was jerky, and by today's standards, it was pretty low quality video. But because you got to see the people actually doing it, it wasn't hard to imagine yourself in that position, and it made you want to do it. And as much as I think that this unmanned technology is absolutely fantastical, I want to see more manned missions in the future, because it will be easier for us to relate to what goes on out there. And ultimately, because we seem to be having such a hard time with managing things here on planet Earth, it makes it rather clear to me that our future is in space.
You bring up an excellent point there. I've been a fan of Cosmos. That was a show that was on TV a long time ago. And one of the things that Dr. Sagan pointed out was, it's one thing to get what information we can from planet Earth, but that can only give us so much. If we want to study things like what happens with runaway greenhouse effect, we need to study Venus. If we want to study what happens in deforestation, because the sun's rays go down and because it's deforested, it bounces off, we need to study Mars. So it is vital to go to these other planets, study what makes them the way they are. Why is Mars so cold? Because the sun's rays go in and bounce off. Why is Venus so hot? Because the sun's rays go in and then they get redeflected around. We need to study why these things are, how it happens, so that we don't do that to the Earth.
That sounds like a pretty good piece of logic to me, and you would think that the environmentalists would be for that, but in your lifetime and in mine, the environmentalist movement has been an incredible impediment to the space program of every nation.
That's true. And I think part of it is, well, we don't want to mess up someplace else. And I can see that. One of the things that was brought out was if we actually find life on Mars, and the life we probably find would be like microscopic, then what do we do? Do we just make Mars a park? What do we do? I don't think we're going to find life on Venus, although you never know. There could be something, but it would be so totally unique.
Well, one of the things that we have learned from Mars is that life is possible there, and that has forced us to redefine what our definition of life is. We were expecting to find vertebrates or something else, and instead what we found was little more than bacteria, and while that may seem laughable to some people, it's where in a universe in which bacteria live and humans live, it means that anything else in between is possible, and the only real question is, where is it, how do we get there, and what do we do to find it?
That's true. And if we do find that there really isn't anything on Mars that we deem we're going to save and make it a park, what do we do with Mars? Then there's the idea, which fascinates me, terraform it. How could we do that? I have laughed myself silly. One of the ways is something as tenacious and as everyday as a dandelion.
Hey, sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. That's very true. Now, going back to the central discussion here, you and I were both asleep at the time when Curiosity landed, but because of the time delay, because the radio signals traveled at the speed of light, it took the people at JPL 14 minutes to get the telemetry back from the probe to find out that it had successfully landed. And it could very well be someday in the 22nd century and beyond that there are new forms of communication that bridge that gap, so that someday people listening to this conversation will think it's rather silly that people in the 21st century had to put up with that kind of time lag for interplanetary communications.
14 minutes, you say? I recall when they were just getting pictures of the moon, and those things had to be radioed back. It had to be put in the computer. The computer had to analyze it, download it, and all of this, and it took more than 14 minutes, let me tell you, just to get something back. And you got these lines, and they slowly came together, and you could see the craters. It wasn't anything like taking a photograph.
Well, that's true. That's true. Now, just for the sake of posterity, I'd like to point out that your cathode ray television set died recently, and so you replaced it with a flat panel television that weighs maybe, I don't know, a third of what the old television used to weigh, and it maybe uses about a tenth of the electricity that the old television used. So that's just one of the ways in which technology has advanced in our lifetime.
Yes, that TV was from 1997, and the flat panel that I have now is about as wide and only about 2/3 the height, but it's only about a couple inches deep, much different than the old thing that I had.
That's true. You know, the Curiosity vehicle is itself somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,600 to 2,300 pounds. I don't remember what the exact weight on this thing is, but again, it's about the size and weight of a small automobile. And that's, to us, that still seems rather formidable that we were able to launch a small car into space, let it fly around for about a year or year and a half, and then orbit the planet and then land it. That's to us, that's a big deal, and I can only imagine once we do get past the point where people actually live on Mars, they'll look back on these days and they'll wonder how it was anybody got off planet Earth in the first place.
I don't know about that, but I can imagine once they find the final resting place of Curiosity or Sojourner or all of these others, they will probably put a fence around it and make some sort of little national park.
At the very least, it'll be a place where a monument will stand. And there are people today that accuse us of littering on Mars because this is something like, I don't know, the 17th mission to Mars, and quite a few of the early Mars missions failed. The vehicles deployed in low orbit and they burned up before they were capable of landing, and nobody remembers that.
Yes, that's true. It shows that things aren't so Star Trek-y that you can just say, make it so, and it's just there or something.
Okay, now we've talked about the state of our technology here in 2012. We've given a nod to the politics of 2012, and we've even talked about the urgency, the impetus that got us this far, which no longer exists. So now, as we look at the way forward, it seems quite probable that NASA is basically going to be a traffic control agency in the future. And we now have emerging companies like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and Bigelow Aerospace that will be leading the way forward. And it's my hope that these private sector companies will be able to do what government agencies could not, just because not only will they have to absorb the risk and the potential financial loss of going into space, but they'll also be able to reap the financial rewards of space travel in ways that national governments have not been capable of.
That's interesting. What if you have some private company who decides they're going to go up there in space and do whatever, and a government can't say, no, we don't want more space junk, or we don't want this done, we don't want that done. You said NASA would be a regulatory agency. What if somebody decides we're just going to be the space pirates and we're going to do what we're going to do, and we don't care if we leave more space junk or if we mess up this or that?
See, now that's where the militarization of space comes in. And the governments will have enough tax money coming in to be able to be able to put space cops out there. And when the space cops turn out to be insufficient, then the militarization of space will kick into high gear, and you will have the wet water navies of the world will be transformed into aerospace arms and then eventually into space navies. That seems to be the way the human mind works. And so if it's possible for a government to militarize something, whether it is a mountainside or the bottom of the ocean, then they're going to do it in an effort to protect their interests. But in this particular case, these interests are already being superseded, overshadowed, if you will, by corporate interest. I mean, we are in the middle of an election cycle, as I've already talked about, and the corporations, the multinational corporations of the world are now capable of meddling in American politics, thanks to a recent Supreme Court decision. And they can outspend the candidates and the governments combined. So if they can do that now in the terrestrial environment, imagine 100, 200, 300 years from now what they're capable of in space.
Yes, that is scary. Just imagine if you have some multinational corporation, you have country X, I won't name a specific country, but you've got country X that decides they don't want something. But you've got multinational corporation, whatever, who's going up there and doing what this particular country doesn't want. Or maybe they are doing space launches out of some ship that's in international waters that's close to this country, and country X doesn't like it. How can country X do anything? Because this is a multinational corporation. They can just go, well, you can't touch us. Nah, nah, nah.
Well, if they can't touch them, then they can't touch them. That's all there is to it. There has been plenty of science fiction written over the decades that suggests that eventually space is the new high ground, and if the corporations control space, then they control the planet. That's just that just is what it is. You have things like in the future the very popular Aliens movies, in which corporations like the evil and despicable Weyland-Yutani, because they control space, then they have more power than the United States government, even though the United States government deploys the colonial marines, which are an ultimately badass, kick-ass, take-names, bug-hunting force in their own right. But still, the federal government, by comparison, is small and ineffective.
But how do you keep some sort of nasty international corporation from not caring about another planet that they go to?
Hey, it's going to take one to beat one.
So it would be, instead of country fighting country, it would be corporation fighting corporation. Corporate wars, suit against suit.
Sure, that's pretty much it. Now, on that happy note, we have come to the end of a very speedy half hour. So just because this little time capsule lives forever once it's uploaded to the internet, what advice do you have to future generations of Americans as they consider what they want from their space programs, both private and governmental?
Ooh, that is a good question. For one thing, I would say don't sit there, go. And for another thing, you need the human being, because that's the only way you're really going to know what's out there. You can send machines, and that's a good first start, but it's only a first start.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And there you have it. If you like what you heard here, you can find us online at politicsandpatriotism.com, where we have many more recollections of historical importance and author interviews just like this. You can click on the RSS feed at the top of our main page, which will allow you to download any of our past episodes for free, or you can get our past episodes for free off the iTunes Store. Or you can go to Stitcher.com, and thanks to the very nice people at the Stitcher Smart Radio Network who distribute this program for us, you can download any of their free apps, which will let you listen to us through your Apple smartphone, your Android device, or your tablet, wherever you might be on this green earth, or quite possibly even in outer space. So on behalf of everyone here at the show, thank you for your time, and have a good day.